we're going to talk about role versus soul today, and this is a tricky topic, and it's one that I found really confusing. I went to a workshop on this last week, and it was not an altogether helpful workshop. It was really annoying, because what I wanted to be able to do was to come back saying, oh, I've spoken to someone who really understands this, and now I have clarity which I can bring to you, but actually I didn't get it. And I have emailed them and said, well, I didn't really feel like I came away understanding the thing that I wanted to understand, so maybe you can help me with that. Let's see what happens. But I still think it's worth exploring. I still think it's a really useful topic. But and it's also one that I find difficult because it's about boundaries, and I actually get quite confused about boundaries. It's not something that I'm very good with. So I think that's part of why I get lost in it, but I think it's also easy to get lost with. So it's not going to be a really clear and easy presentation with lots of answers, but hopefully it's going to raise some useful questions that we can go away and think about. So the kind of key question to start with is what actually are roles? Right? If we're going to talk about roles versus souls, it's kind of obvious what souls are. They're people. We know what people are. We're sort of, tangible objects, right? But what actually are roles? So here's a metaphor that I think might be helpful to explore what roles are. And it's thinking about acting and the difference between an actor and a character. And I remember seeing a theatre director, Jonathan Miller, talking about interacting with performers. And sometimes the thing that performers will say is, I just don't think that my character would do that. Right? Could you walk from this side of the stage to this side of the stage at this point in time? Because we need it for some reason or other. I just don't think my character will do that. Well, how did you know that? Did she fax you? Did she email you? Did she send you a message via character pigeon? How do you know that your character wouldn't do that? And there's something in that, what's going on when an actor says, my character wouldn't do that, right? Is that a role thing or is that a soul thing? And there are some cases, I think, where it's a bit more clear-cut than others, right? So where I think it's really clear-cut is if you can say, well, if I look at the actual text that we're performing, here are some facts that we can say about the character that I'm being asked to perform. We have some actual stuff that we can take away. We know that my character is, whatever, a 70-year-old man, so he's not going to go skipping from one side of the stage to the other. It doesn't make sense. But there are other circumstances where it's just I don't know, it just kind of feels off. And that's quite tricky, isn't it? You imagine working with an actor and they're like, oh, it just kind of feels off here. And it's is that because of you, that actor, and you're uncomfortable with this in some way? It's you not doing as much as you could, or you not overcoming some internal barrier? Or are you sensing something that's actually really going on for the character, and that it actually undermines the character and the performance and the effect that we're trying to have if you do this thing, right? Here's another example. If you and I are opposite each other in a scene, right? We're making a film. It's a long day. It's a 12-hour day, and the first AD says, oh, well, we're running behind, so we're going to do 2 hours of overtime. And you think, oh Jesus, no, not 2 hours of overtime. But maybe I'm really chipper and I'm still full of beans and you're exhausted and I'm playing opposite you in this scene and it's really emotionally intense. And in some ways, therefore your performance opposite me is a bit lackluster, right? Because you're tired, because we're doing overtime. But then here's the thing, where does the feedback from me come from about the issue that I'm having with the fact that this overtime is causing a problem, right? So in my character, I have a need that your character faces me with a certain energy, right? That we interact in a certain way so that my character can come to life in the appropriate way. But then, it's this thing where, could I say, as Macbeth, I need you to not be tired, but the whole world of being tired and overtime and those constraints don't exist within the fictional world that we're performing in. They exist in that outer container. So overtime is an issue for actors, which isn't to say that, because it's within the scene, maybe I've already conveyed my emotional requirements to you from character to character. But that's where it shows up, it's your character is just not very convincing here, but it's not actually that an issue it's not that your character hasn't been set up properly. There's an actor issue playing into the way that the character is happening, right? And then the other example is, my character wouldn't do that, or, and I'll tie it back, we'll come back to this, yeah, maybe even on the next slide, so it's sort of split across these two slides. But it's like, let's look at this example. Do you want to do this versus does it make sense for your role to take on this project, right? It's like seeing the difference between the fact that you, the actor, are not gay, but your character, who you're playing, is. So your character has a certain set of desires which you don't have. Does it make sense for your character to seduce this other character? Right? Your character has a totally different value set to you, or whatever other thing. Does it make sense for your character to blow up this building or whatever? Anyway, so extending that metaphor and taking this on to sort of like the personal versus the. Actually, let me just check. Was there anything else that I wanted to say on that? No, perfect. The personal versus the professional. Right? So it's sort of distinguishing the stuff that you don't feel like doing from the stuff that's not important to do. And I want to make it really clear here that I think there's a value in us knowing what we don't feel like doing. So sort of coming back to the acting metaphor, right? If I just, I don't think my character would do that. I just get a general sense that my character wouldn't do that. And if what that actually expresses is it just wouldn't feel authentic to me, I can't summon up a way of really authentically making that move from there to their work at that point. Maybe my character would do it, but however, because it just doesn't sort of feel right, it just doesn't sit with me personally in some way. If I do it, it's going to look stilted. It's not actually going to be a very good performance. So there's a similar way in which it's actually really important to know what you feel like doing and what you don't feel like doing. Like I always think, there's sort of the important and urgent quadrants. Like we're always trying to work on stuff that's important and urgent. And then I think there is another dimension there. We could sort of extend that into a three-dimensional model because it's the stuff that's engaging there, nicely ducked, but obviously not actually ducked in any way. So, but I appreciated the effort. That actually knowing, what's important and urgent, and then among the stuff that's important and urgent, what's the thing that I feel most engaged to do right now? Because, I always think, if you sit down and think, well, I'm really engaged to do this thing, then you'll be productive at doing that, and you'll get loads of it done. Whereas if you think, oh, I'm not really engaged to do this thing, you'll take all day, dicking about, checking social media or whatever, distracting yourself from it, and it won't really happen. Now, sometimes the thing that you don't feel like doing, I happen to personally not enjoy doing this particular thing, but it's an important part of my job, and therefore I have to do it right now. Even though it's going to be awkward and annoying, and I'm going to have an unfun day, and because I'm not really engaged in it, it's going to take me a long time, and I'm going to resent that or whatever. Sometimes we just have to sort of deal with that. But it is important to separate out that sense of, is it just that I don't like it, or I don't feel like it, or it's not important? This comes up in governance when we're asked about, do we see a reason why this causes harm? We're not really being asked as a person, right, because of that fourth question in the governance test about, is this something that you feel on behalf of your role, or is it something that you're doing on behalf of another role or on behalf of the circle in general? So it's like we're really being asked from the role, is there a harm being caused? Versus, is this something that you just don't like? And that's kind of one of the weird things about governance, but it's also one of the important things about governance. Maybe it's worth reminding ourselves about one of the kind of philosophical ways, one of the important philosophical ways that holacracy is different from most other ways of working, or it encourages us to work in a way that's different to most other ways of working, is that sense that, in most organisations, all it takes is one person to say, I don't like this, and something doesn't happen, Whereas holacracy says, it should just take somebody to say, let's try this, and it does happen, provided it's kind of safe to try. So we're really being, and for me it comes down to that thing that we just always feel that we could do something better than somebody else in some way, right? Often that feeling will come out in a slightly different way, but it's like, well, I wouldn't, I wouldn't solve this problem in this way, or I don't think that this is an important problem, or I have some other linked problem that I want to have solved, or whatever. All of these things are things that the governance tests sweep aside and say, your objection has to be that there is harm caused to a role. Well, hence why it's important for us to know, what the hell is a role? Distinguishing the character from the actor. And as I said, do you want to do this versus does it make sense for your role to take on this project? It's you might not want to walk from here to here, but we can both sort of sit down with the governance, just like actor and director could sit down and actually look at the script and say, yeah, I know you don't feel like, playing this particular reading of this story where this character is trying to seduce this one or whatever, but let's actually look at the text like it's all in there. Look, we can see all this evidence for it. So it probably does actually make sense for your character to do this. It probably does actually make sense for your role to take this on. We're never asking, will you take on this project? It's always, will your role do it? Will you track it? Right. So some sort of background there to the difference between roles and souls and how they're hard to distinguish, but yet they're also kind of important. So this is a potential way of, a kind of technique for addressing this challenge of the way in which these things get mixed up, which was what this workshop was about. And this technique is called the language of spaces. And yeah, I'm going to introduce it to the extent that I understand it and put my own little spin on it for now. So in Alacrity, we're kind of familiar with this, right? We are doing two things. We are sensing and we're responding, right? We're familiar with this idea of kind of sense and respond, right? There are tensions and then there is action that we take on behalf of those tensions. Tensions are, you've all seen, I'm sure, that rubber band, it's there's a gap between where we are now and where we would like things to be. There's a potential for something to be better. That's why there's the rubber band, because, attention is a potential. Attention is potential energy. Something could be better here. Okay, great. So we have sensing and we have responding. But one of the things about role versus soul is to say, well, maybe there are different kinds of responding. So maybe when we're sensing tensions, there are different ways that we need to respond to those tensions. And some of those tensions are organizational, and some of them are personal, right? So on the organizational side, when we're thinking about our work, we might want to process those tensions into tactical governance. But then on the personal side, we maybe also have tensions there that we need to process that could be individual, that are just about ourselves, or relational, or about us and other people. Now, what's going on here? Why is this important to have these four things, these four different ways of processing tensions in these two different kind of spaces, the personal space and the organizational space? Well, the first thing is that it's always useful and powerful for us to ask, how might the personal be playing in here, right? That's this DDO question that I'm so interested in. I'm facing this problem in front of me, is some bit of work needs to be better than it is now. There's a tension that I'm sensing. Okay, well, how could it be that the way that it is now, or the gap that I'm sensing, is actually to do with me and how I am, how I might need to change to make this better? I'm just having terrible trouble with this one client. They're just so difficult to work with. I just cannot get data from them. I cannot get them to sign this proposal, even though they keep promising it to me. Okay, so maybe there's an issue on, executing stuff with a client, but maybe actually, hey, one of the things that you realize, there's something going on for me here. I'm actually really impatient with this client, or I'm not being, empathic. I'm not understanding their world. Something's going on for me. And that's what comes back. I've talked about this before, how, a really powerful individual learning for me is I've ended up in this argument, I'm not enjoying this. And I've ended up in an argument and I'm not enjoying it. Somehow I'm in this conversation, it's very angsty. How did that happen? Oh wait, I caused it. By the way that I approached the situation, I got stuck in an argument that I didn't want to be in. So this is kind of an individual learning there, and actually, the work will get better because there's some individual learning, or racial learning, how stuff going across. So the first thing is, there's always having this concept of these spaces, being aware that there is this kind of personal space, that there is this individual and relational dimension to the section consents, can help the work get done while giving us personal growth at the same time. But then the other really crucial thing here for me is about this, like, minding our own business. Like, what is our business and what isn't our business? It's complicated around this. Like, when we start to think of this sort of model of these two spaces and these four different languages, or whatever they've got, these four different dimensions, let's call them that. But when we were talking about the, like the acting metaphor and the role versus soul, you can see like distinguishing these things is quite tricky. So I want to offer you, and I wish that I had a great answer, right? I wish I could just say, oh, I've figured out a really clear and easy test that will help you work out whether what's going on is personal or whether it's organizational. And I haven't got that. But what I have got is some kind of provocations for thought, which I hope will be useful. We're going to have another go at this. Right? I've had several goes at this in Graduate Fundamentals in my time, and I've drawn it on numerous whiteboards today. But today I feel good about this. I feel like maybe it's going to make sense. This is the four integral quadrants, right? And we have two axes here. We've got the individual and the collective, and we've got the interior and the exterior, right? So the individual interior, and each of these quadrants have names. The individual interior is the subjective, thoughts, emotions, right? The individual exterior is the objective, that's physical reality, my body and stuff that I can touch. The collective interior is the intersubjective, is our shared values. And the collective exterior is the interobjective, which is systems and networks. Now, I just want to take a deep breath because it already feels like a lot and quite confusing. Here are some things that are really helping me understand what's actually going on here. The first is that the objective, these two objective exterior quadrants, there's a kind of a bit more of a clear blurring there than there is between the individual and the group, because they're both about the system. They're both about the system that we find ourselves in, the system that I as an individual find myself in, and the system that we as a group find ourselves in. And a distinction that I find really helpful here is one of these, we sort of said before, maybe you've heard me say before this thing about, culture is sort of what we do and the stories that we tell about it, but I want to separate that out a little bit to say, what we do is over here, is the objective, and the stories that we tell about it is here, is the subject or the interior. Okay, I'm going to provide another perspective which might help with this. Here are some different labels that we could put on the quadrants, and here's an actual problem that we can work. Right, the problem is that the washing up isn't being done. Right. We can see that there are various dimensions that we can look at this problem in. The first is that we could look at the sort of psychological, the individual interior, my own personal stories. That's sort of me feeling like I don't really want to do the washing up. It's not important to me. I'm lazy, whatever we want to say, right? The psychological. But we could also take a systemic view and say, maybe I'm not doing it because the system is biased against it. Maybe if we just had a dishwasher. Do you see what I mean? We could say, the number one problem in us sharing this flat is that you are not doing the washing up. And I could either make that into a problem about you and the fact that you don't care enough about doing the washing up, or I could just say, how could we change the system to design this problem out by, getting a dishwasher or whatever it is. And then there's a sort of group thing as well. Just as if the cause might be that I hold individual values that washing up isn't very important to me, there's a sort of psychological component. There might be a group component that it's just not very important to us, right? And then again, there might be a sort of systemic intervention that we can make there. Just as we could buy a dishwasher to say maybe we can get around the fact that it's not very important to me personally, maybe there's something that we can do as a sort of social intervention, which is, we have a rota or something, right? We make some sort of agreement. So we can change stuff in the system, which can be sort of very physical stuff that we can touch, or we can change stuff in the system that's a bit more abstract, right? But we have these different dimensions that we can look at the problem through. Here's another way of looking at that. Within an organization, we could look at, say, you know, our business wants to do something new and exciting and different. We want to take on new challenges. Well, there are different ways, different perspectives that we can have on that, right? We could say there's a sort of strategic perspective, right, which is the new challenges that the business wants to face, the new areas of business that we want to take on, which in turn has a sort of collective interior quality, which is to say, how are we going to have to change as a group? How are we going to have to change our collective values and mindset, you know, our culture, in order to serve that strategic objective? You know, like, what will it be about the work of whatever this thing gets called, you know, there's new opportunities, whatever. What will it be about that work that needs to be different? Or what will it be as we start diversifying into different sectors that actually needs to change the way that we think about the world as a group and change our common conception? But then there's another relation here, which is we as a business take on some new challenge, some new thing that we want to face. Well, that then cascades into new challenges for individuals. Our sense of changing what it is that we do as a business will change, our expectations that we have as a business will change individual expectations, will change the nature of roles. And just as changing the nature of the business made us have to think about our collective mindset, so changing the nature of our roles makes us have to think about our individual mindset. There's a developmental perspective when we say, my roles have now changed. Like, maybe there's an example, if I can use you as an example, Jaylan, there's a shift between the kind of relationship that you have to have with a client to deliver their tax credit claim, right? There are certain boundaries around that, certain expectations. It is different from the kind of relationship that you do if we were doing an engagement to, you know, help people learn the open culture interview. And, you know, maybe to fill that different role, actually you find there are changes that I have to go on in my mindset, right? So this is another way that we can use this sort of 4 quadrants, that we can see that they all sort of link into each other and they all give us a slightly different perspective on the same issue, right? Here's another slightly different framing of that within an organization, which is that within a business we have the actions that we take individually and then their context, the tactical. You know, we have the stuff that defines, in fact, and then we have, you know, our interactions between us, and then the context of that, which is governance. But actually, I think this next slide puts it a bit better, which is this individual interior. This individual interior is about me doing my job, right? Me doing my job within the model of my job, right? So Holacracy says, in the tactical space, we have to track our, bless you, projects and our next actions and our priorities, right? So we have to define for ourselves, says Holacracy, you know, and it doesn't tell us how we have to do that, and nobody's going to police it, but you have to produce evidence that you're doing this on demand if somebody else asks for it. You have to produce for yourself like a model of what your job is, as well as going and actually executing your job. And that model of what your job is, the tactical stuff, exists within the model of what the business is, which is governance, right? Which then links into the us doing our business, which is the culture, right? So back to this, like back to these kind of quadrants, basically. So this 4-quadrant model. Now, the reason that I've gone on this detour is I want to come back to these 4 spaces, right? My model of doing my job, our model of doing our business. So this is the model that we have, the organizational, versus the actual execution of me doing my job, or the actual execution of us doing our business, which is the individual and the relational, or sort of the individual and the cultural, right? Now, this line down the middle is in some ways, I think, the hardest one to draw, but also the most important. Like, it seems to be sort of much simpler to draw this line. right? We're quite good at understanding the difference between tactical and governance, right? And accuracy really helps us with that fact. And it's generally, relatively clear the difference between the individual and the relation. I'm not saying there isn't a bit of a blurring of that, but we can make that distinction. But this one, like the difference between the model of the job and the business versus the sort of the doing of the job and the business. And the reason why I want to emphasize this line and the difficulty in drawing it is because, of course, the reality is like this, right? It's all just sort of blur. Like this is just, is this model helpful to us? And the reason why that's not the slide. The reason why I think this is important is because we come back to this issue of, like, is it your business to have an opinion about this and to give feedback on this, and should other people listen to you? When we're crossing that line, like, can we cross that line? Is that okay? So if I say to you, well, if it was me doing this job, I would do it differently. Like, that's one that always comes up when we talk about, do you have a right to give feedback outside of your roles? Well, what if I see someone doing something that I just know is inefficient, that they don't know is inefficient? Can I just go over and tell them? That's if it was me, I would do it differently. That's annoying that I've not put those slides next to each other. I'm going to fix that because I want to tab backwards and forwards between them. That sounds a lot like relational feedback. That sounds a lot like we're meeting person to person. Because I'm telling you about the individual stuff. I'm telling you about how, that wasn't, no, okay, fine. So actually I need this one to be next to it as well. I'm telling you about how you choose to do your job. We're not talking about the model of the job, but we're talking about how you personally bring yourself to that, right? So we're not, it's actor feedback rather than character feedback. We're not looking at the text and saying, does it make sense or not? We're saying, well, if I was performing that role, I would give it this or give it that, But then here's the way in which this sort of already begins to get messy. As a role, I feel a tension when a role does something. But it just gets confusing to me here that we're like, I feel a tension. As a role, it really starts to, like, the model just sort of slightly starts to dissolve in my hands, I feel, when I get to this sentence. Because I'm like, who is feeling what? Like, if a role is just an abstraction, how does it feel anything? Is this just a figure of speech? Or when we inhabit roles, are we like sort of method actors? Are we really feeling on behalf of the character? Is that something that we can say that we do? As structure and culture, I feel this. Wait, let me just check. Is this a feeling that I bring from the context of me being Andrew right now? Or is this actually a feeling that I get when I'm really inhabiting the character? Is that what we're doing? And then, we talked about like testing objections about, at the start I was saying about like causing harm. My objections from a role. My role will be impacted by this. There is a harm versus I don't like this in some way, which is not a harm, which is not a valid objection. But crossing the line, right? Formal feedback versus interpersonal feedback. Role feedback versus soul feedback. Like, I've had feedback recently about how I behave when I'm triggered, when I'm in a sort of heightened emotional state. And it's like, does a role have the right to give me feedback about how I behave when I'm in a heightened emotional state? Using our formal feedback process, using are you meeting your accountabilities and can you be removed from your role as a result of that process? Does a role have a right to tell me about that? Or is that an interpersonal issue? Or is it two things that are getting mixed up in each other? That maybe there's an interpersonal context and a work context? I don't know. But there's a real value in getting clear about the feedback that we're giving. And here's why. Because the clearer that we get about which of these spaces we're operating from, the more we're taking responsibility for the situation that we're in. And the less we're blaming, the less we're putting it on other people. So and the reason that I say that is, like, again, one of the sort of weird things about holacracy, but it is a way that it coaches you to think, is if you're accountable for something and somebody else does something that causes a mess or a problem, but it's a problem that you have an accountability to do something about. Like if I had an accountability of, you know, like every time the client holding account goes out of balance, I hold some kind of detective role where I have to work out what's gone wrong. Then if I hold that role and you make the client holding account out of balance, it's still my responsibility to fix it, right? I can't say, oh, you caused that. Now, maybe I also have some interpersonal feedback, which is when you executed your role, you did it in a way that made the client holding account out of balance, the individual side, right? Your role didn't cause that problem. You personally caused that problem in the way that you did your role. And I can't really give you role-to-role feedback because the role-to-role stuff is super clear, which is when there was a problem with the client holding account, it's my role's responsibility. So the clearer we get, the more we take responsibility. Everything has a place, but not always in holacracy. Again, it's like maybe some things don't get solved effectively through governance. Like we hack governance. It's a hack that I'm the originator of, saying, okay, we'll have this home planet thing, which is sort of using the governance process to make clear stuff about our expectations of each other or our expectation of our relationship with the business. Is that a helpful hack of holacracy, or is that actually misleading? Is it ever the business of the business to regulate the relationship between adults? That to me is a really interesting question, because obviously in traditional views of work, this separation doesn't exist. There's a complete merging of the work and the people, of the role and the soul, right? So under those circumstances, the business takes a very strong view about behaviour that is or isn't appropriate in the workplace and what you should do. But the more complete that separation becomes, the more transactional the organisation is, the more we can say, you regulate among yourselves as responsible adults the way that you are with each other. The business just exists to hold a model of your individual work and the sort of global view of the business that fits into. That's actually the end. Okay, but so I guess what I want to end by saying is this separation of role versus soul, I think can be, let's go back to a nicer picture of it without the line down the middle. There we go. This separation of role versus soul, of the personal from the organisational, can be really useful. And here is how, even though, as I said at the start, this is a confusing topic, and this is a presentation that has more questions, more unanswered questions than it does answers, there is still something that I think that we can take away that is actually a practical tool that we can use, which is just an awareness of this, right? And an understanding that when we are sensing, when we feel a tension, that often we need a different response in each of these different frames. And then it can help to stop for a second and think, okay, this is the tension I think, particularly if it's, it's a big tension, right? If you're really impacted by it, if the feeling is strong, it can be really helpful to say, okay, what do I need to do about this from a tactical point of view, from a governance point of view, from a relational point of view, person to person, and from an individual point of view, from an entirely personal point of view, what do I need to say to myself? And it's really helpful to work through it in that order, because often it's this one, the individual or personal one, that's the murkiest, right? Because if there is something that you need to say to yourself, that's often going to be about servicing something that's a bit hidden for you, it's a bit shadowed for you. So by going around in this order, you get increasing clarity with each step. So by the time you come to the individual one, and it doesn't need to take very long, right? It doesn't need to take more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but actually just thinking, okay, here's a piece of paper with, like I've drawn for myself some quadrants, and just have a think or go for a wander. Some people find it really helpful to actually literally think about 4 quadrants in space and to move between them a bit. But to go through each of these things and say, okay, just thinking from my roles, just thinking from the world of projects and priorities and next actions, is there anything that I need to do here? And don't move on to the next one until you've got at least something in each space. And often what you will find at the end of that process is one of those spaces really pinged for you. Like in 3 of them, let's say, you felt that it was a bit sort of forced or artificial, and that you could come up with something that you could do in that space, but it didn't seem really very important or significant or whatever, compared to the 4th one where suddenly. But the thing that's interesting is, until you actually sit down and do this methodically, you often don't know which is the quadrant that's going to pop. You might be looking at this issue and thinking, oh, this is definitely a person-to-person issue. And then you stop and think about it, and you think, oh no, wait, actually, it's about governance. There's something that's not clear, in the system. Okay, that's everything that I want to say. So I want to turn things over for questions and comments.
Does this need to be up there?
Yeah. It's always nice to get people's questions and comments on the video. Oh, does it need to be? Oh, yeah.
That's what I meant, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Did you want it to be there, facing in, or were you happy here?
Oh,
I'll give you the camera now.
Okay. Yeah, great, thank you. I'll hold it for now.
I had something to contribute, and I got really excited because it was the first time I ever say something in one of those meetings for ages, and with my excitement, I kind of forgot basically the whole thing. But essentially, what I was thinking was the distinction between the role and the individual was if a role can be challenged at all, it means the role and the accountability with the role are incomplete. Because a role can't necessarily challenge a role, it's always going to be someone else's opinion. So a role, if you're giving feedback from a role, you're using that as a shield to give your opinion on that role, and you're saying that essentially, in its state, you are not doing what this role needs to do. And if the role, which is never going to happen, you're never going to have a role with every single accountability, everything up to the standard it needs to be. At that point, I don't know what I was going with it, but basically just saying that it will always, in that instance, be an individual giving feedback on the role, not a role. There's something that that hits on something that I remember that I did actually really want to put into this presentation and then I forgot about. And so I'm going to find it.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
It's just sort of like going back to the actors and like Macbeth. It's like if an actor said, "I don't think your character would do that." That's kind of what you're saying. It's like that's not completely scripted out word for word in every way, shape or form. But it's also not another character giving that one feedback. Yeah. It's a person giving the character feedback. So it's the person individually giving the feedback rather than another character. Yeah. It's not role-to-role feedback. That was just the way that makes sense of what you said.
This video was ended because of an error. That's happened, isn't it? My tactical interface. So it's almost like this is a clue to us about how roles can interact with each other, which is, through a very sort of set formula. Like a role can ask another role for projections to break down. This is all in the Constitution, right? A role can ask another role for projections. Can ask that role to specify the next action on any project that it's holding, and to give a sense of relative priorities among their various projects and next actions. Any role can ask another role to report on the metrics and checklists that are assigned to that role. And similarly, you can ask for a project or action to be taken on, or a metric and checklist to be taken on. So there are some, like, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the whole extent of role-to-role interaction. This is the bit that really isn't clear to me, because I've followed the same line of thinking that you're saying, Sam. And when I get to the end of it, it's almost like, well, there is no role-to-role interaction. It's like roles don't do anything. And then you think, well, but wait, but that doesn't feel quite right either, because then all we've done is we've just moved that difficult line so that it's, this is the delay, let's see, is it going to catch up? Well, maybe it is or maybe it isn't. But we've moved the line between, here it is, great. So we've moved the line, but I guessed where the line was down the middle. I was really pleased with that. We moved the line so far over here that this is sort of nothing and everything is over here. And then it's like we've sort of gone back to the old days where everything is always personal. And we've lost some of the clarity of the separation. So, did you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I was going to say, it's kind of like, it's basically the objective stuff, like when you're talking about roles and accountabilities. Sometimes, for example, like in sales, it's like 2 qualified deals, and then you look at a metric that someone's saying they want to do X, and then that's typically where objective feedback can come from other people, for example. But if it's just in terms of like, if it's something subjective, like, oh, maybe you could have done something different in this way, you're just interpreting how someone can behave different, and that's kind of more individual.
Yeah, and there's also something in there which is maybe like, I was thinking about the my tactical interface, like my priorities is if there's a sort of clear set of accountabilities, a clear list of projects, clear list of actions, everything is clear there, and there's something that I think is really important that you're committed to that you're not doing, there's a sort of person-to-person interaction that I can have. So maybe this is a place where it actually gets clear. Because in that sense, in that circumstance, there's a person-to-person interaction that I can have with you, where I say to you, if it was me, that thing would be more important to me than it appears to be to you. I think that you should do that thing. And you can weigh that up and say, yeah, interesting feedback, but no, because we're just speaking person to person. But then we can also speak role to role, because as a role, I can say, well, I think this thing that you're not doing is much more important than you think it is, and it's more important than some other stuff that you're doing. And holacracy allows us to set relative priorities. So I can go to the lead link of the circle and say, this piece of work that seems important is not being done, and this piece of work that seems unimportant is being done. Maybe you want to do something about it. And the lead link can say, yeah, that seems like a problem to me. Okay, well, there's now a new priority in this circle, which is this piece of work over this piece of work.
Are you giving that feedback based on how that other person's work impacts your work?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or, and here's where it's becoming messy, is that actually what that conversation is if I'm not the lead link, and I think that there's something that's important that you're not doing, I can then go and have a person-to-person conversation with the lead link and say, I'm not the lead link, but if I was, this would be of concern to me. So as a word to the wise, person-to-person, this piece of work is being done and this one isn't. And then the lead link, whose role is to sense on behalf of the whole circle, can then say, okay, thinking on behalf of the whole circle, does that work seem more or less important than that? And there's the challenge for the lead link, again, in crossing that line, in separating out. Is it that, I agree with you. If it was me, that piece of work would be more important than that. But wait, let me just step into character. Now I'm the lead link. It's not about what I would do if I'm in that role. Genuinely, for the circle, is that piece of work more important than another? Like, you could see that it might be something like, something trivial, making sure that all of your emails are sorted into folders, maybe a trivial piece of work, making sure that all the client contracts are actually signed, important piece of work. Yes, maybe it's quite clear that we would say, well, there's a priority to be set there. But then a more ambiguous one would be, I think that you're spending a lot of time on a sales approach that chases a high volume of small leads, and I think that it is a better use of your time to chase a small volume of high value leads, okay, so I've clued the lead link in that this is how I feel, and then the lead link has to say, yeah, well, if it was me, I would definitely be of a mind with you to chase the smaller number of high value leads, because that's what I would do. But wait, which actually serves the circle better? Does it really matter to the circle? Because here we come into a question of self-management. Does it really matter to a circle which it is? Like, if your role already has a clear metric assigned to it, which is, what is the total volume of, projected sales that you close in a given period, we can see what your performance is, and it doesn't really matter to us in a self-management situation how you achieve that performance. So, yeah. Does that help sort of bring a bit of clarity? I feel clearer as a result of that example that you brought and thinking it through. Anybody else? Anyone online? Well, I mean, I know people are online, but does anyone online want to say anything? No? Okay. Super. Is there anything else in 11 minutes? I don't think so. Oh, maybe has anybody had? Yeah. And has anybody had anything that from previous weeks in this series where we've talked about vulnerability and trust and sort of leadership, minding your own business, and about the nature of kind of meditation? Just really curious if there's anyone who's been to any of those sessions and has noticed that anything has changed or that they've done anything differently off the back of anything that they've learned there.
So I'm more aware of the mind your own business that I was before, and it's something that comes in. I don't know if I necessarily act on it, but I'm aware that I should be minding my own business sometimes when I start talking. Which before I didn't really associate, I just felt that like, do I need to be saying this? But now I can actually attribute something to it. Like, I probably shouldn't be saying this. It's minding my own business. I'm still saying it, but it's there. Let's get it down.
And does it help having that awareness?
Yeah, of course, because then you can associate it. If you can't act on it, or I feel like I can't act on it if I don't know exactly where it's coming from and why I feel weird about something. But now I can tell the weirdness is coming from, so I probably shouldn't be saying it. Whereas before I just felt I had to write like,
Yeah. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm also appreciating the shared language. Like, I feel like it's become a common language and something we can refer to. It's something I noticed.
oh yeah, I'm super aware of own language now as well, like that. So this the example I'm picking out is one that stuck in my head, but when you say, "Oh, she's hot,"
Yeah.
I think she's hot. I'm way more aware now if I'm saying like that's the thing. It's now way more like, "Oh no, I feel about this thing."
Yeah.
I didn't have before.
Yeah, I do this all the I put myself doing it in tiny. I mean, I'm not a big believer in microaggressions and things like that, because I just think it's for me. I think it's focusing on the wrong thing. So in own language, in some ways, the language that we use is really important. Yes, neuro-linguistic programming, the language, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the language that we use shapes the thinking that we do, shapes who we are. But in some ways, like if we concentrate exclusively on the language, we can be using what is technically unowned language, but the internal message could be owned. And that's, for me, the more important thing. Like, are we acting from a place where we're taking responsibility? But even having said that, I noticed that there are these tiny linguistic things that I do, which are there's a sort of there's an unowning about them. Like, of course, of course this means da 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 da. And I just think, I look at, sometimes I see myself having typed that, and I think, of course, because it's just like I'm saying. This is not me giving a subjective view which could or could not be wrong. Here I am telling you what you actually mean, or something like that. And it's like, if I can substitute of course for maybe, or say, I think. Yeah, that's one that I'm really noticing. And it's a small one, but Anyone else?
I think similarly on the mind your own business kind of having spoken about it, I felt less bad for minding my own business. Like I felt more okay about just like, I don't have time to read that or figure that out, or I've sent it. But actually that's okay because it's actually nothing to do with anything that I can have or should have input in. Whereas before I was kind of like, oh, I really should know a bit of everything and maybe have an opinion on many things, and I don't, and I feel a bit like bad about it, but now I'm like, cool, I don't need to. So I appreciate kind of like the freedom from that. That's really the intention.
Cool. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've been trying to find it really hard to do.
Yeah, it is really hard to do. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to me that it's really hard. I'm really glad that you shared that because I think it is really challenging. Yeah, and although it's hard to do, when you do it, do you find that it helps? Do you find that it brings you like greater clarity or effectiveness, or does it have a reward basically?
That's my next answer question.
Yeah.
I'm trying my best to answer that. So I think like I still like find myself definitely like finding the I know that in theory that is the right thing to do to kind of draw the boundaries and let people basically get on the stuff that you should be kind of interfering with. But I don't know. It's like this kind of I don't know. Yes, basically still finding it very very hard. I don't know what that answers the question.
Yeah. Well, what I wonder is maybe if the stuff that we've covered this week might even help a bit with that Quaker, that you can see that actually, the minding your own business, like it's okay to interact with people person to person and to say, this isn't my business, this doesn't actually come from a role that I hold, but hey, person to person, here's the thing, but it just brings you a bit more clarity about when you're doing that, and therefore, like, what's appropriate in that situation and what right the other person has to say that they're not interested in listening and so on, So maybe that will help. I don't know. Let's see. Any more?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's definitely there's definitely some stuff in there that will be useful. I also think it's like a process. These things take time to kind of rein in. It's not like one day you're going to be kind of looking at all the other different parts of the business and kind of having opinions on those, feeling that you should be sharing. Okay, like where do I need to rein this in? Where is it appropriate? Where is it not? And yeah, I think that all of this information that you're sharing today, like definitely does help to make a more kind of informed set of decisions there.
Cool.
I think in what you're saying as well, it kind of gives a way of other people giving feedback. So as Quaker says, it's difficult, but I think as Will was saying, I guess I notice it more in other people than I do myself. I think I say stuff all the time, which isn't from a role because I'm not thinking about it in these terms. But I can't say, I don't think, unless I felt really strongly that it was from a role, which I would only analyse if someone said to me, I've heard you, but it's not your business. But like knowing all this stuff, just sets the scene for people to be able to do that and to feel comfortable doing it. Yeah,
and I think that you point to something there which is like, if you've shared it with someone and they said, I'm not, thanks for that, but I'm not going to do anything about it or whatever. Like what I make up is, if you weren't necessarily that bothered by it, you could just say, oh well, it would be easy just to let go. Okay, well, I gave your opinion, it's up to you now. But it's when you really care about it, that when it feels really hard to let it go, that having these tools to say, okay, wait, what's going on for me here, can be the most useful. Anyone else?